The silence that followed the storm was the most deafening part. One moment Mark Karpeles was the king of a new digital frontier, the CEO of Mt. Gox, a platform that handled over 70% of the world's Bitcoin transactions, a man who controlled a seemingly endless river of invisible money. The next, on a cold Tokyo morning in February 2014, he stood before the world, a pale and hulking figure, and with a few quiet, devastating words, announced that nearly 850,000 Bitcoins, belonging to hundreds of thousands of users, had simply vanished. It wasn't just a corporate bankruptcy. It was a digital ghost story, the evaporation of $500 million into the silent, unforgiving ether of the internet, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and one terrifying question: where did the money go? Our story begins not with a bang, but with a quiet obsession. Jed McCaleb, a programmer and early crypto enthusiast, stumbled upon the concept of Bitcoin and saw its potential. In 2010, he registered the domain mtgox.com, a name originally meant for Magic the Gathering online exchange, a site for trading fantasy cards. He repurposed it into a rudimentary Bitcoin exchange. It was a simple, almost clunky platform, but it filled a desperate need. A year later, he sold it to a man who seemed tailor-made for the role of crypto visionary. Mark Karpeles. Karpeles was a French-born programmer, a large, bearded man with a gentle, almost awkward demeanor. He was a technical savant who preferred the company of servers to people, a man who saw in Bitcoin not just a currency, but a technological revolution. He moved to Tokyo, rebranded Mt. Gox, and under his leadership it exploded. At its peak, it was processing billions of dollars, the undisputed heart of the crypto ecosystem. Users from all over the world poured their savings and their dreams into their Mt. Gox wallets, trusting this gentle giant and his digital fortress. But beneath the gleaming surface of success, the code was rotting. The platform was built on a fragile foundation, a patchwork of fixes and updates that couldn't keep pace with its own meteoric growth. Users began complaining of frozen accounts, delayed withdrawals, and inexplicable errors. The support tickets piled up into the thousands, a digital graveyard of frustration. And then, the whispers started. Small, seemingly isolated incidents where users would find small amounts of Bitcoin missing from their accounts. They were dismissed as glitches, the growing pains of a revolutionary technology. But the glitches were not random. They were the footprints of a thief. Unbeknownst to anyone, a backdoor had been found. Someone, or something, was systematically draining Bitcoins from the system's hot wallet, the online storage connected to the internet for daily transactions. It was a slow, deliberate bleed, a hemorrhage of digital assets that went on for years. The first major crack appeared in June 2011. A massive anomalous transaction was spotted. A hacker, exploiting a critical vulnerability, had manipulated the transaction ledger, effectively creating Bitcoin out of thin air and siphoning it out. Mt. Gox was forced to halt trading temporarily. The community was rattled, but Karpeles assured everyone it was a one-time event, a flaw that had been patched. The platform roared back to life, and the world moved on. But the thief hadn't been stopped. They had just changed their method. The real heist was quieter, more insidious. Instead of a loud, explosive attack, the hacker, or hackers, had gained persistent access. They were like a ghost in the machine, silently watching, waiting, and plundering the vault at their leisure. Karpeles, overwhelmed and perhaps in denial, focused on expanding his empire, launching new projects, while the very foundation of his wealth was being hollowed out from the inside. The tension built for years, a pressure cooker of user complaints, internal chaos, and the silent, steady draining of funds. Then, in early 2014, the lid blew off. The United States government served Mt. Gox with a subpoena concerning its failure to register as a money transmitter. This external scrutiny forced Karpeles to finally confront the monster in his basement. He began a deep forensic dive into the transaction logs, a labyrinth of code and cryptographic keys. What he found must have sent a chill down his spine that no server room could ever warm. The discrepancies weren't minor accounting errors. They were a canyon. Hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins were unaccounted for. The slow bleed had been a catastrophic rupture. Panic set in. He halted all withdrawals, citing technical issues. The crypto world held its breath, and on February 28, 2014, that breath was ripped away. Mt. Gox filed for bankruptcy in a Tokyo court. The official document stated the unimaginable: 850,000 Bitcoins were lost, worth nearly $500 million at the time. The news was a detonation. The price of Bitcoin plummeted. Ordinary people who had invested their life savings logged on to see a zero balance, their digital lifeblood siphoned away into the void. One user, his voice trembling in an online forum, typed the words that echoed for thousands: "My life is over. It's all gone." The investigation that followed was a global spectacle. A complex puzzle played out across international borders and the shadowy recesses of the dark web. All eyes turned to Mark Karpeles. Was he a victim of an unprecedentedly sophisticated hack? Or was he the architect of an elaborate Ponzi scheme, a modern-day Madoff who had finally been caught? The Tokyo Metropolitan Police dove in. The picture that emerged of Mt. Gox's internal operations was not one of criminal masterminding, but of staggering incompetence and neglect. Karpeles, it turned out, had been running the multi-billion-dollar exchange largely by himself. The cold wallet, the offline, secure storage for the vast majority of funds was a mess. Private keys, the digital passwords that control the Bitcoin, were found stored on a plain, unencrypted USB drive. A treasure map left on a park bench. Audits were non-existent. The line between company funds and Karpeles' personal finances was blurry at best. He had used user deposits to fund his lavish lifestyle and other business ventures. The narrative of the bumbling and over-his-head tech genius began to solidify. But then, a twist that sent the case spiraling in a new, even darker direction. In a shocking turn, the U.S. government unsealed an indictment against two other men, Alexander Vinnik, a Russian national, and a shadowy figure known only by his online alias, Trendin Shavers. The investigation revealed a sprawling, complex money laundering operation. The theory was now that Mt. Gox had been systematically hacked for years, not by one individual but by a sophisticated criminal ring. The stolen bitcoins were funneled through a maze of online exchanges and mixing services in an attempt to erase their digital fingerprints. Alexander Vinnik was accused of being a key launderer, operating the infamous BTC exchange, which acted as a primary sinkhole for the stolen funds. The plot thickened further when a former Mt. Gox employee came forward with a bombshell claim that Karpeles had known about the security flaws for years and had actively covered them up, falsifying balance sheets and internal records to hide the massive losses. The question was no longer just where did the money go, but what did Mark Karpeles know, and when did he know it? The stage was set for a dramatic courtroom showdown in Tokyo. For years, the trial dragged on, a meticulous and often tedious process of presenting lines of code as evidence. Karpeles stood accused not of the theft itself, but of embezzlement and data manipulation for inflating the company's balances. He maintained his innocence, a solitary, beleaguered figure fighting the might of the Japanese justice system. His defense was a portrait of a man who was naive, overwhelmed, and tragically incompetent, but not a thief. He claimed he was the ultimate victim, his life's work destroyed by anonymous hackers he could never hope to catch. The prosecution painted a different picture, one of a man who, through a combination of arrogance and desperation, chose to deceive his users and the world rather than face the humiliating truth of his own failure. They presented evidence of him spending millions of company dollars on personal luxuries, a damning counterpoint to his claims of innocence. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a battle over the soul of the entire crypto industry fought over the actions of one man. And then, the climax. The moment that changed everything didn't come from a witness or a document, but from the silent, immutable ledger of the blockchain itself. In a stunning revelation, blockchain analysts from the firm WISEC published a definitive report. They had followed the digital trail, transaction by transaction, and had conclusively linked all the major thefts from Mt. Gox stretching all the way back to the 2011 hack to a single, persistent source. The same digital fingerprints were on every stolen coin. This was not the work of multiple hackers or a random series of attacks. It was a coordinated, long-term campaign. The evidence pointed overwhelmingly to one inescapable conclusion. The thief had never been on the outside. They had gained access to Mt. Gox's secure transaction signing server years earlier and had been living inside the system ever since, like a parasite, methodically looting it at will. While the prosecution focused on Karpeles' financial crimes, this evidence suggested the real culprit was a ghost, a specter of code that had outsmarted everyone. The verdict, when it finally came, was anticlimactic in its legal specificity. Mark Karpeles was found not guilty of embezzlement, but guilty of tampering with financial records. He received a suspended sentence. He walked out of the courtroom a free man, but his reputation was in ruins. The true hacker, the architect of the greatest digital heist in history, has never been identified, their identity lost in the maze of the internet. To this day, over 850,000 bitcoins remain missing, a frozen fortune whose value has skyrocketed into the tens of billions. The mystery of Mt. Gox stands as a stark, chilling monument to the dangers of a world built on trust and code, a world where your entire life's savings can be erased by a phantom in the machine. The echo of that silence still haunts the digital landscape, a ghost in the machine that was never laid to rest.